And hi everyone, welcome back. So for this segment, we will be talking about behavior chaining, and it is the last procedure that we will be talking about during this topic. So again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And just a quick warning, Carlos will be stepping out during this video, so just so you're aware.
Yeah, it's not that I don't like you all or that I don't want to be here. There's actually a thesis defense that I have to go to, so that's everything's happening online. So that's what I'm listening into right now to tell me when to take off.
Okay, cool. So first, let's talk about complex behaviors, right? So how many of you guys have Instagrams? It's a pretty common app. I'm sure a lot of you do. And it does not just Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, right? So I have a question for you. Is getting on any of those social media a single behavior, or is it a series of behaviors? Well, it's a series of behaviors, right? Because there are different steps that kind of go into you being able to actually get on the app. So what if you wanted to teach someone like your grandma how to get on Instagram? How would you do it, right? Because maybe she is not technologically fluent. So for her, it's more of a task to do this. So you as a behavior analyst in training, how would you teach them? How would you accomplish this? So first, let's kind of try to break down those sub-behaviors that go into getting on Instagram, right? So first, you need your phone in your hand. Then you're gonna press the unlock button. Then you're gonna locate the app. Then you're gonna press the app. The app is gonna open. You're gonna touch the screen. Then you're gonna slide your fingers down. And that is what's gonna ultimately lead you to being able to scroll through the pictures on Instagram, right? So as you see, as you guys had thought, this is a series of behaviors, right? It's not just one behavior. So this is exactly what we mean by behavior chains, right? We have the big overarching kind of label, right? Getting on Instagram. But that's actually a behavior chain, right? Just as we saw, there are multiple steps, multiple components that go into this chain, right? So think of this as a sequence of behaviors that are connected. But what are they connected by? That's the question. So whenever you do something, right, it presents the opportunity to do the next part of the steps, right? So think of them as an SD for the next step, right? But they're also conditioned reinforcers for what came before, right? And we're going to break that down a little bit more. So remember that a conditioned reinforcer is a learned reinforcer, probably because of its relation to some other kind of reinforcer, right? When we're talking about chains, it's usually what's accomplished at the end of the chain. And again, we'll go through more examples of that. So we've been talking about the ABCs, right? So we have the antecedent behavior consequence as if it's just one. But again, with complex behaviors, we can have links of these ABCs. So here, for example, we have an antecedent and a behavior, right? The behavior occurs, which has a consequence. But as we've talked about, the consequence then kind of sets the occasion for the next step, right, which is an antecedent. That opportunity to engage in the response, right, an SD, it evokes a behavior, and that behavior has a consequence. And then guess what, right? The consequence, again, sets the occasion for the next response. So it's an antecedent for the behavior, and it keeps continuing in that way, right? So whenever we talk about dual function of a stimuli, this is exactly what we're talking about, right? That a stimuli can serve as both the consequence for the previous ABC and as an SD for the next sequence.
Yeah, and I think going into that, I think that's whenever we look at behavior in everyday life, this is really the way it's structured, right? Because we don't ever stop behaving. It might not necessarily parse out into perfect chains, but we do participate in chains in our everyday life. Just a very regular conversation that me and Will might be having. If I ask him something and he answers, his answer functions as my consequence, right? But at the same time, it also serves as an antecedent for me to respond back to him. So conversation is a really good example of what a behavior chain might look like.
Cool. So exactly what we mean by stimulus duality. So now let's break down that chain of getting on Instagram into and name each step as if it's an SD, consequence, or a behavior, right? So phone in hand, that's an SD. Pressing the phone's unlock button, it's a behavior. then the consequence is that the app is now available on the screen, right? Now you can actually look at the app. So then that's the reinforcer for pressing on the unlock button. And it's also the SD for the next step, which is pressing on the app, right? Which is a behavior. And then what happens as a result? What's the consequence? The app opens up and displays a picture. Now, the app opening is the reinforcer, and the availability of the pictures are an SD for the next step of touching the image, right? Which is a behavior. And then the pictures are displayed on the screen, which is the terminal reinforcer. And that's a new term. So what that means is that this is the reinforcer that is maintaining the whole chain. So in a way of speaking very loosely, it's the thing that you set out to do all those steps to get at the end. So for example, why did I get on Instagram? Because I wanted to go through the memes and the pictures, right? So I engaged in this whole sequence of events to get to that final end, right? The terminal reinforcer. And we know that it's a reinforcer because I'm constantly on Instagram, right? Cool. So now let's talk about another example. So here we have making a sandwich, right? To us, typically developing individuals of adult age, this is like 2 + 2, right? Pretty much everyone knows how to do this. So what if you have an individual that doesn't have that skill? How can you teach them to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Well, you have to break it down into small steps and teach it, right? So first, let's say you have the peanut butter and the jelly sandwich, right? You get 2 slices of bread, right? Then you open the peanut butter. Then you spread the peanut butter, put the lid back on, open jelly, spread the jelly, put the lid back on the jelly, put it all together. What do you get? You get the terminal reinforcer, which is the creation of the sandwich, right? So again, making a peanut butter sandwich is a category or broad behavior made up of component behaviors, okay? So keep that in mind. So let's go through another example, right? Especially in this day and age where we're dealing with, unfortunately, the coronavirus, right? And I feel like it might be pretty relatable. So let's say that we want to grab a beer or a glass of wine, right? If you have chilled wine in the fridge. So what's the components that go into that? So you have your refrigerator in sight, right? That's the NSD, right? Because it's correlated with the availability of reinforcement. Then you open the door, that's the behavior. What happens as a result? Beer is in sight, right? That's a conditioned reinforcer, right? Because that is what maintains that ABC, but it also sets the occasion for the next behavior, which is what? Grabbing the beer. Then you'll have the next thing, right? Now you have the beer in your hand. Can I consume the beer yet? No, right? I gotta open it. So again, that's what maintains the behavior of grabbing, that now I have it in my hand, but that sets the occasion for the next step, which is now you have a beer open. So then you have the beer open, what happens? You drink the beer. And then what's the terminal reinforcer that maintains this whole chain? You get to drink your beer, right? And it makes sense. So there are very systematic ways that you can actually utilize chaining, behavior chaining, to actually teach new skills. There's a couple of different ways to do it. There's forward chaining, backward chaining, and total task presentation. And we're going to be talking about each one in turn now that we've kind of wrapped our heads around what a behavior chain is. So these kinds of procedures, again, are very useful when you're wanting to teach a complex skill. So first step, right, what you always want to start off with is you want to break down that complex behavior into its component parts. And we do this, oops, sorry for that typo, by creating a task, T-A-S-K analysis, right? And a task analysis is when you break down a complex skill into its component parts. So the component parts are the smaller behaviors. There are procedures that exist to systematically teach these skills, and I've already mentioned them. So we're going to talk about each one in turn. So here we have some stuff that I'm going to be using to kind of model the behavior, okay? So, and how to use these procedures. So first, we want to be able to put the key together, right? Because right now it's disassembled. Let's say that I'm an individual that doesn't know how to do it, and a behavior analyst came in to teach me how to do it. So what do? First, create a task analysis. So the steps are going to be take a piece of the containing the key and place it on the table, grab the remote, place it on the grooved key piece, place the back piece and snap it into the key piece, place the screw into the pre-designed screw plot, grab the screwdriver and drive the screw until you cannot turn it anymore. And that's it, right? Then you'll have the final product, which is the key is going to be assembled. So now let's go through forward chaining. So a forward chaining procedure is one where you start with the first step in the link and you work forward, right? So let's show you what that looks like, right? Let's go back to the task analysis. So first step is taking the key with taking the piece with the key and placing it on the table, right? Did it. Cool. So now move on. Now we're going to do this for 3 more trials, right? Because this is across sessions, not within sessions. So I'm going to teach these in parts. So then I do it again. Okay, second time, he knows how to do it. All right, do it one more time. Boom. 3 times, feel confident that they're good at this behavior. So now I can move to the next step. So now what I'm going to have the individual do is they're going to grab this remote key and place it in the grooved key piece. So what's going to happen is they're going to do this. See, ta-da, I did it. Now let's try it again. One time, do it again. See if I can do it. Boom, second time. Then I'll do it again. 3 times. See, a lot faster, a lot more confident in my behavior. And then I graduate to the next step, right? Exactly. So the procedure creates a chain of behaviors, starts with the first link and works forward, right? Forward chaining. And you see how I was providing reinforcement after each step. So for instance, on step 1, it was just placing it on the table and I was saying, hey, excellent job, great work. That's a contrived reinforcer because it's not what's going to maintain the chain, but it's how I keep it going while I teach the earlier steps, okay? And then after that, once I raise the criterion, right, then it's going to move to this. And once this happens, hey, good job, right? Because this isn't enough. Now I want to reinforce the next step. After this, I'm going to move, after they're good at that, I'm going to move to the next step, which is placing this key on, this cover on it. See, I did it, boom, reinforce, right? So then try it again. I complete this step, like this, boom, right? I do it correctly, get reinforcement, right? So that's what we mean by forward chaining. This kind of procedure works well for short chains. So like in this example, with assembling this key, there's only like 5 or 6 steps. So it'd be ideal for this kind of procedure. Simple chains, right? It's not too complicated to assemble this key together. And you have a small number of the quick and discrete responses makes it easier to work with forward chaining. Okay, so now we're going to talk about forward chaining, right? So with backward chaining. So with backwards chaining, instead of starting from the front, right? So where I start here, then I move to this piece, then I move to this piece, then I move to screwing this on, right? In theory, let's say I grab the screwdriver, screw it all the way in. Backward chaining is the opposite. So I'm going to start from the finished product and work backwards. So let's say that there's a behavior analyst here and he's going to teach me how to do it. So the behavior analyst first is going to do the final behavior, right? He's going to do everything except the final behavior. So I take out the screw. Okay, and then he's going to give me the opportunity to finish it, right? So I put on the screw and I screw it on. Reinforce, right? Now the terminal reinforcer, I have a working key, right, that I can use. So let's say that after 3 trials, I master doing the screw part. So now the behavior analyst is going to progress to the next step. Okay, which is, hold on, let me remove this. Okay, so now the behavior analyst is going to take apart the key and move to a previous step. If I can get it. Okay, there you go. So now the behavior analyst is going to present me with all the steps completed up until the last two, right? Which is place the cover and then place the screw. So let's just pretend that I put the screw in, right? Screw it on, and I do it. So then he's going to do it again. He's going to present me with this. I place the cover, screw it in, okay? So now I graduate from that, and now he's going to give me the next step. So now he's going to want me to do this, screw it in, right? And then he's going to do it again. Again, working backwards. He's just going to give me the first step, and I'm going to complete everything else by myself. And we call it backward chaining because it's the way that the person implementing it, the behavior analyst, is working, right? Because they're requiring the individual to work backwards, right, from each step. So that's what we mean by backward chaining. So it's a procedure that creates a chain of behaviors where you start with the last link of the chain and you work backwards, okay? It involves the practitioner, right, me, the behavior analyst, working through the earlier steps and leaving only the last steps that the individual needs to complete, because that gives them access to this, right, the terminal reinforcer. Because the terminal reinforcer is what's maintaining the behavior, right? So this kind of procedure works well with long chains, right? If you have a piece of music, it's helpful to work with backwards chaining. You have a complex chain, if there's a lot of components to it and there's a lot of things going on, it's useful in those circumstances. And also when it's really helpful whenever you have a terminal reinforcer, right? Because that's the thing that's maintaining the whole chain. So like another example, right? So let's say that I'm teaching an individual, right, 2-year-old, how to tie their shoe. Why do we tie our shoes? What's the terminal reinforcer? That they're tight and it prevents you from falling, right? So that is the maintaining consequence. So then what we'll do is we'll do all the steps up until the last one, which would probably be bringing one of the ends over and under and tightening. Actually, it'd be tightening, right? Just tightening, you do that. And then you teach them the over and under, again, while you do all the previous steps. So then there's a different procedure, and this one's called total task presentation. And this is probably going to be the one that we're most familiar with, just because it's kind of the way it works in our day-to-day lives, right? So basically with this one, in a single sitting, right? Let's say that we have, again, go back to our key. In a single sitting, the behavior analyst is going to work forward and see what I do independently. So first step, placing this on the table. I can do that. Cool. So he moves on to the next step instead of mastering a skill and then progressing forward like in forward chaining. So he knows I already do this, but he sees that I'm not good at putting this in. So what he does, he'll teach me that step, right? So we'll work extra practice. Once I get it, then he'll move on to the next step, right? Within that session. So then I'll put the key on. And so then we'll try again. Put the key all within the session. He sees I'm pretty good at it. Then we move on. And then we move to the last step, right? Which is putting the little screw in. So then he gives it to me and I try to complete the behavior and I'm not able to do it. So then he'll provide some extra guidance. And lo and behold, now I have my completed key that I can use to open my car. So it's a variation of forward chaining. You start with the first link and you work forward. However, the learner receives training on each step in the task analysis during the session, right? So before, it was across sessions, right? Because we would master one skill in one session. And once we master it, then we progress, right? It could be over days if necessary. But with this procedure, it's all in one sitting within the session, right? So I have here, I do this, boom, put it all together. So this has pretty similar benefits to forward chaining, right? It's useful when you have short chains, simple ones that don't have a lot of steps, and required quick and discrete responses. So this is hand washing, right? How would you use chaining procedures to teach this? Would you want to work forward? Would you want to work backwards? It's all really up to you, right? Depending on what you think as a behavior analyst would work best in your situation. Because I can use both forward chaining and backwards chaining. So in this, with this task analysis, I may want to do backward chaining, right? So I'll help them turn on the water, wet hands, add soap, wash hands, rinse hands. Oh, and that's actually, given the coronavirus and stuff, this is probably a very, very applied and important skill to teach nowadays, right? Which is why we see all those websites telling us how to properly wash hands. So if we had a kid with an individual with autism, we would teach, if we were doing backwards chaining, I would complete all this and the individual would incomplete this. Once they master that, let's say after five trials within the session, we'll move to the next session. So then I'll complete all this, and then the individual will be required to fill these last two steps, right? This is the terminal reinforcer, right? Having dry hands. And then again, we'll keep working in that order, working backwards until the individual is finishing the whole chain independently. So what if we had a behavior like going potty or going to the bathroom, right? Again, with kids with autism, it's not a very, and not even kids with autism, just all kids, it's not a very straightforward and easy skill, because you see all kinds of self-help books that parents have for teaching their child how to use the bathroom. So with this one, I may want to use a forward chaining procedure, right? We'd master putting the pants down. Then after this, after I know they've done it, let's say 5 times in a row, we'll move to peeing in the toilet, right? So then we'll do these steps together. And then we'll move to this one, right? Or I guess because going to the bathroom involves 2 different kinds of topographies, you would teach them separately, but then you teach the wipe, then you teach pulling pants up, etc., right? Kind of makes sense. So the main takeaways is that when you're dealing with complex skills, it's always useful to break them down into their lower parts, right? Complex skills are made out of component parts, right? So remember, if the category is this key is made up of a cover, this remote, this other cover with a key in it, and has a screw. Those things make up the bigger category, right? Just like with going on Instagram, it's large behavior, but it's made out of component behaviors, right? So each component has to be taught individually, right? Just because we're typically developed and can readily learn a lot of this stuff, we can't assume that it works the same for everyone. Sometimes it's really important to break down these skills into behavior chains and teach them that way. So the links themselves, right, the ABCs can be linked utilizing these chaining procedures. And depending on the task, if you have a terminal reinforcer, it might be better to work backward chaining than forward chaining. But again, a lot of this is more of nuanced explanation or nuanced details that you guys will learn in another class in the future. Right now, we're more interested in kind of introducing you to these different kinds of techniques and how they incorporate the principles of behavior, right? So overall, given all the topics that we've talked about, right, with applied behavior analysis, the 7 dimensions, and the behavior change techniques, take-home points, right? Behavior analysis, especially applied behavior analysis, strives to produce socially significant change, right? Meaningful improvement in people's behavior and lives. That is the goal. Techniques aren't, created spontaneously. They are all derived from the principles of behavior, right? So they are all combinations that we use to try to get that desired socially significant effect. And in behavior analysis and applied behavior analysis, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to choosing interventions. There are always going to be conditions where some techniques and procedures are more effective than others. And you, as a behavior analyst, it's your job to know when to use them. And again, I gave you an introduction to that, but as you progress through your education, you will be learning the ins and outs of when and where to use these procedures. So I hope this was helpful, and don't forget that there will be a post-lecture assessment for this content uploaded. So make sure you complete that, try your best. It's okay if you don't get the answer perfectly correct on the dot, just give it your best shot. If you do that, we will work with what you give us, okay? So I don't want you guys to stress too much about that. Again, and all these questions are gonna kind of set you up for the final, right? These are the types of questions or considerations, kinds of concepts that we would want you to keep in mind for this class and for your career as a behavior analyst in the future. Okay, so if you have any questions, again, please do not hesitate to ask. Hope you guys have a pleasant week, and I will be in touch with you guys soon.